Continue. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, like I said, for joining us. My name is Lebo Setole, and I'll be facilitating the session. As I mentioned earlier, please, could you, if you've got any questions, and we'd love to answer your questions, could you please type them out in the chat section? I'll be facilitating the session, so I will be reading out the questions that need to be asked. Otherwise, I'm going to take over and read the questions, or ask my own questions. The second thing that I would like to ask of everybody who is on the call, I would really want this session, because it is an information session about a lot of things that a crucial part of the African life, but also other religious beliefs. And I'm going to ask that we treat it with as much respect as possible. If you're going to ask a question, ask it as respectfully as possible. I am going to also ask that you, I think that's just basically it. The respect is extremely important in this instance. And if it doesn't resonate with you, then it doesn't resonate with you, and that's something that you need to accept. But it's, for me, I did this thing so that we can all learn about another part of life that we don't know about. If you are not respectful, I am going to ask the ACA to exit you from the meeting, because that's something that I will not tolerate. And I don't think the people on my panel will tolerate it either. And respect goes a long way, guys. So can we give people the opportunity to present who they are and tell us about their world and how they interact with their world? And then that's it. And then just to give you a bit of context around how it's going to run. So I've got two healers on the call, and they'll introduce themselves, and I'll give them an opportunity to intro themselves. And then we've got a labor attorney also on the call, because I thought it was a really good idea. In fact, it was Yenani's idea. Yenani thought it was a really good idea to have a labor attorney to kind of help us, maneuver through the conversation with a business lens as well, from a labor perspective. So so if I can ask Kakamba, can you first of all introduce yourself, and then I will go through the other people.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Kakamba. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. If you can't say Kakamba, you can say Q. Everybody calls me Q. And I am an employment attorney, practicing attorney. I also run a consulting business called Effective Forces Consulting. And hopefully we'll be able to assist in answering some of the questions that you may have this morning. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you very much. And just so that I can manage the information session today, Kakamba unfortunately has to leave us early, about 15 minutes, you said, ne? 15 minutes prior to us finishing off, because she does have a hearing that she needs to prep for and get and do at 12 o'clock. So bombard her with questions before that time comes. Okay, the next person I'd like to intro themselves is Gogo Jebu.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Gogo Jebu for this context. I've been working at the Sangoma for 4 years, and I'm also a trainer of initiators at Sangoma.
Okay, awesome. And then the last person, definitely not least, is Yenani. If Yenani could introduce herself.
Hi, I am Yenani Madigwa. I am a traditional healer. I'm an integrated creative director in the advertising industry. But yeah, in this context, I suppose I'd be Gogo's Tembi Sokeka.
Okay. Okay, great. So thank you very much, ladies. So I guess the first question to ask, and I don't know who I'm going to ask this to, Gogo, can I ask you, I'm going to pick on you. Can you tell us more about the world that you are working in from a traditional healer perspective?
Hi, I'm sorry, is this me or Gogo Stembiso?
Sorry, it's
Sorry, can you please repeat the question?
can you can you tell us more about in fact, let's start from the beginning, guys. So let's start from the beginning. How did you know that you need to go for training to be a healer?
So my journey was 7 year long. I was sick and I found that so a lot of things were not going well in my life. So I was in corporate and it wasn't going well. I wasn't getting along with colleagues, and it really was my fault. I was not okay mentally. So the spiritual afflictions were manifesting, especially with my mental and physical health. And so going to doctors, clinicians, giving me feedback. Okay, this is what it is. This is depression, major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder. And, you can imagine just how many friends I was losing in the process, with the anxiety and the depression, and being admitted in psychiatric institutions, losing my job, getting another one, and just not being at peace. You're just not feeling at peace, and doctors can't really explain what's wrong with you. So at my most desperate and lowest point, I finally decided to consult with the Sangoma. And the thing about consulting with this Sangoma is that they're not like doctors, so medical doctors that you have to tell your symptoms to. So with this Sangoma, they say, when you wake up, this is how you're feeling at night. This is how you're feeling. You find that this is what is happening in your dreams. You wake up at 3 a.m. and this is because you're gifted. So they don't just say you're gifted. They say because of 1, 2, and 3 that you're feeling, and it resonates with you. It has to resonate with you. This is what it means. Can you go back to your elders and ask them? And of course, our elders will say, we are born again Christians. We don't know what you're talking about. But ultimately, then my dreams started clearing up, and I was shown who my Gobela is through dreams and visions. And I consulted with her. She said, no, look, I have been dreaming about you, but I was waiting for the penny to drop on your end first. And then I could take you in. And then I got initiated as a Sangoma.
Thank you. For those who don't know, can you explain what a Gobela is?
Gobela is the role that I now play. So it's the mentor and teacher and initiator of other initiates. So other people have now started dreaming of me and give them. So I'm concerned with their spiritual health and mental and physical health. So I administer some herbs for them to get well. I listen to their dreams. I sometimes intercede on their behalf with their ancestors and mine to try and mentor and to make sure that their journey goes well. So that's what Gobela does. It's a teacher and initiator and mentor.
So basically what you're saying is that you cannot just go wherever you want to go get training.
Definitely not. So, I'll give you an example, Lebu. There's a totem that the people who are supposed to be initiated by me that they dream of, right? And that totem, a lot of them have been dreaming of it throughout their lives. Some were younger, some started dreaming or paying attention to the dreams when they were older. So maybe late teenagehood, early 20s, mid 20s, some even in their 40s. So when they start paying attention, you're like, this totem has always been there. So it's almost as though I've almost always been in your path somehow. And some have dreamt of me during their very important milestones. So maybe when getting married, maybe when getting their degrees, then this totem keeps coming up, like there's this thing in your path that will make sense after a few years. The most interesting thing is that one of them is 8 years older than me, but before I was born, she interacted with the totem in real life. So before I was born, this totem started appearing in her life, and then it was in her dreams, and then we met. So you can't remix, you can't use your own will, your own limited understanding to find Gobela. There's a lot more involved in that. So you have to dream of the Gobela. And my rule is I also have to dream of you to know that our ancestors are now in agreement that it is time. Even if I'm your Gobela, now it is time for you to start.
Okay, got you. Thank you. That was a nice explanation. Yenani, are you able to take us through your journey? How did you know what happened from the beginning?
Sure. So, a full disclosure, Gogo Jebu actually is my mentor. So she's very closely linked to the story that I'm about to tell. So I'm just going to keep it brief. Essentially, I've kind of like always known that I was gifted, but with the lack of context in terms of what does it mean to be gifted, and my context and my environment at the time, I always believed that, whatever spiritual gift I had would be something to do with the church. I always had prophetic dreams. My parents are staunch Christians. My stepfather's a pastor. And, going into the church, there'd be like prophets coming around, prophesying over everyone's lives. And I kind of like always felt like that there was some kind of spiritual gift there. However, the thought of it being ubungoma never once crossed my mind. Fast forward to 2018, my now husband proposes, and it is time to start, the lobola process. The night before my lobola process, I dreamt of Gogo Jebu. And essentially in this dream, she was interceding for me in a way so that the lobola process goes smoothly. She was praying, kind of like in the context of a prophetess, which she is. And she was praying over me, praying over my family, and the lobola process went well. That was now 2018. Fast forward almost a year later.
Sorry, Yenani, we're not hearing you anymore.
Oh, sorry, I don't know why it muted. It muted me. But fast forward a year later, and something, dramatic and tumultuous happens in my life. And I remember that I once dreamt of this lady that's a healer that I've never met before. And I just had to see her. Something like just deep in my gut said, the answers for this thing that is happening, she probably has them. And it was a very like intense situation where I needed very clear and direct answers because I was terrified of what, the thing that was happening meant for me. So I get into my car, I drove, I texted her. I mean, I didn't know her at the time. I just followed her on Twitter. So I texted her and I said, hey, may I please come for a consultation? Something weird is happening and I really need your guidance. She says, sure, come through. And I was on pure adrenaline at the time. And I can't tell you like how I got there. Like, I can't tell you that, okay, I got into my car and I drove and I turned here or I turned there, pure adrenaline. Next thing I knew, I was literally in her yard. So I go into a consultation, my very first time ever consulting with a traditional healer. And she's essentially like spot on about the situation. That brought such an incredible like sense of peace and knowing in my life that I didn't have at that moment, but I needed. And the months after that, I knew that, my relationship with my ancestors and my relationship with God could no longer be a thing that, kind of just happens when I'm in a really like weird position in my life. So then my journey of, praying consistently, upahla consistently started. But with that also, all the dreams that you hear that people get, I'm having dreams of myself underwater. I'm having dreams of the totem that Ubaba spoke about. But at the time, obviously, I did not know that that was the totem. Having dreams of this totem, I'm underwater. Some of these dreams I'm flying. Some of these dreams are like extremely prophetic dreams, but to the T. Like I will have a dream having a conversation with someone, and the very next day that conversations happen exactly as I had dreamt it. But even then at that time, I just thought, oh, so this is what it means to be like divinely guided. And this is what it means to have a relationship with God and my ancestors. at the time, I didn't think that I was gifted, you know, in the way of ubungoma at all. A few months later, I get the urge again to go and speak to Ugogo Jebu again. I park my car in front of the yard. I step into the consulting room, and before you know it, I am in a full-on trance. You know how human beings usually speak of an outer body experience? I felt like there was a woman much older than me having an inner body experience. So I'm in a trance. This woman is speaking, like using my body. I had felt like I had stepped out of my body and someone else was speaking. Essentially, this woman is lamenting the fact that she had been sending me many dreams, and you know, she's tired, like she's just tired of creating dreams for me. Like, why won't I get the message? Like, we've been telling you, you don't listen. This is where you're supposed to be. You're gifted. And my gobela is literally like sitting in front of me, experiencing this trance. And it's just like, you know, this whole dramatic thing. Eventually, I am back in my body. And, you know, I think I was quiet for a few seconds because I did not understand really what had just happened. But a part of me knew what had just happened. Like, just intuitively, I was like, oh my God, I've just had a trance. A person, my ancestor, just came from wherever ancestors stay and spoke through me. And these were the things that she said, and, you know, consistent, you know, with the dreams, with the visions, with everything. I definitely need to trust her. And at the time, I had really started struggling, like just performing the basic functions of my job. Fortunately, it hadn't gotten to the point where, you know, my outputs were visibly just like bad. You know, my ECDs were still very happy with my outputs, you know, very happy with the work that I was bringing to the table. But the work that I was bringing to the table was taking 10 hours to get to like that magic point where usually it would take like an hour or 2 hours. It was just that much more difficult. Yeah, the very next Monday, I think this might have happened on a Saturday. The very next Monday, I spoke to my direct line manager. I told him, listen, man, this weekend, this thing happened, and I had been feeling just not okay for a while, and I need to go twasa. And yeah, I went down Bandayo twasa.
If you don't mind, Gogos Tembiso, actually, do you mind going through the detail of the turmoil that you were experiencing in the work environment at the time before actually going in your twasa?
Absolutely. So, you know, I would describe the kind of like turmoil as, I'm going to describe it in its like physical manifestations. So feeling extremely like sleepy, lethargic all the time. Disclaimer, you know, the turmoil manifests physically different for every single person. So for me, I think for my ancestors to kind of like get my attention, they really needed to like affect my thinking and my creative process and my brain. It was very much like in this part of my body, because they knew that, you know, I'm the kind of person that will work while sick, physically sick. I'm the kind of person that will work while like in pain, but I can't work without my ideas and my brain. So I think that's why they went for that part of my body where I'm constantly feeling like brain fog, lethargic, can't concentrate, can't focus. I'm not sleeping. I was sleeping maybe like 3 hours every single night for weeks and weeks and weeks. And there'd be some times where I wouldn't sleep for like 3 days straight, but in my not sleeping, I can't focus either, meaning I'm not answering briefs on time, or meaning I'm just not bringing like that magic that I usually did. So these were all the ways in which, you know, my ancestors were trying to get my attention. But at the time, without the context of, oh, this is possibly like Indwaso that needs to happen, or this is possibly your ancestors trying to get your attention. To me, it just felt like burnout. That's just what I would call it. Like, oh, I think I have burnout. I think I'm burnt out. I just need to sleep. I need time off. When actually it wasn't that at all. Another way that it manifested, and fortunately, there were never incidents at work like that, but I found myself like very short, not the friendliest person to be around, very snappy, and also instead of de-escalating situations, I would want to see like a situation explode. Like if someone cuts me off in traffic, I'm hooting and screaming at them and, what the F is wrong with you? Where did you buy your license? Like that kind of behavior, which after Uktwasa, or during the process of Uktwasa, I realized that it was very much in line with what it means to have what is called ulaka lwamadlozi, or like hostility that comes or arises, or a hot temper that comes and arises when obviously you are now experiencing or feeling physically the frustration that your ancestors are also feeling with you not listening to them. So many different things were at play there.
The next question, thank you very much, Gogo. The next question I have is for Kakamba. I'd like you to give us a view of, from a workplace perspective, how do we support people who are going through exactly what Gogo Jepu and Gogo Stembiso have just taken us through? What is the responsibility or the duty of the employer in a situation like that?
Sure, that's quite a difficult question.
How do I make it easy?
So, I mean, there's two primary issues here, right? The one is obviously your right to your religious beliefs or conscious beliefs of sorts, and that's enshrined in the Constitution. So we have a constitutional right to practice our religion and to practice our beliefs, right? So I think at a primary level, it's respecting that right and not, conducting yourself in any way as an employer that infringes on that right. Then there's the second part of it, which is the ill health issues. And perhaps some of them are not just ill health. I mean, they sort of touched on performance. Although Gogo Stembiso said it hadn't completely reflected on her overall performance, but it did have elements of affecting her performance. And for some people, it may affect, their performance. So I think, the primary thing for any employer is understanding what it is that you're dealing with. So, because I mean, as an employer, you're only seeing the symptoms, right? Half the times, which is, this person is just sleeping at work. They don't understand, similarly to you. And once you then have a diagnosis of what it is that you're dealing with, and I'll make an example, so with reference to one specific case, which is cited many times, and it's the law on dealing with these issues of traditional healers, is the Kivitz-Kroon case, right? So Kivitz-Kroon country estate case, this case started in the CCMA, went to the Labour Court, went to the Labour Appeal Court, and went all the way to the Supreme Court of Appeal, because it was a burning issue. So, and just if I can quickly just talk briefly about those background facts. There, the employee said, I need time off, and on more than one occasion. And on the last occasion that they needed time off, it was for quite an extended period. And the employer said, this is a really difficult time, we're short-staffed, and they refused to grant this leave. And this person said, well, the problem is that if I don't go, this is impacting on me. So I really need to go. And then they just left basically at the employer a letter from their traditional healer saying this person has to go for an initiation process And yeah, and then the employee went off. Now, the employer was like, okay, this person is not at work. I didn't approve this leave, and they're gone for a long time, and they dealt with it as a misconduct because they had been absent without authorization, right? And then they dismissed them. So the matter then goes to the CCMA, and the CCMA commissioner says, but you have an employer who's white and you have a Black employee. And I think the problem here starts with the fact that you don't understand what this is about. So that's the first thing the commissioner says in that case. But importantly, in the end, the commissioner says there was an explanation for this absence. The explanation for me is an important one, because the explanation was there is this belief that is driving this situation, and unfortunately, I can't do anything about the situation because I have to go through initiation for health reasons as well. So the health thing then comes up, So the one explanation is one linked to the religion, which I said enshrined in the Constitution. And then the second leg comes for them to say, if I don't do this, I might die. That's the extent to which the employee says in this specific situation. The long and the short of it, and there's various judgments, as I mentioned, it went through the different courts, is, the last court, which was the Supreme Court of Appeal, it talks about the fact that the 80% of Black people consult traditional healers. And there's a need that we identify that this is the state of play that exists. Even the World Health Organization recognizes that this is a means by which employees and other people use to get treatment. And so there's that part, the need to recognize that this is the situation. And the second part is, which some people were getting wrong in the different courts when they were arguing about this, is that we want to apply Western traditional medicine theories in assessing whether or not there's a legitimate health issue here. And this is not something that can be assessed and dealt with reference to measurement tools that are applied in Western medicine. So our measurement tool needs to be different as a court. And the measurement tool, the court says, is this belief in what this employee is saying, I need to get treatment, is there a belief, one that you can say is not driven by any improper motive, but it's a reasonable belief. It comes from a place, if I can say, lack of a better word, it's an honest place. It's not driven by malice. It's really, this is what this person believes. And if we can start from there, then, for me, we have what the court said is a reasonable explanation from this person to say, I really needed to do this because, for me, this is what it meant. It slightly touched on the issue of sick leave and sick certificates, but I don't want to deal with everything at this point, because the court said here we were not dealing with a fight about whether or not the employer should have accepted that sick leave certificate, that letter that they get from the traditional healer. That wasn't what was, the main thing that we were dealing with. We were dealing with an issue about their right to exercise their belief and so forth. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at that point. So firstly is having a diagnosis, because the symptoms, you have to deal with whatever is presented. If it's a performance issue, you start with the performance, but once you're starting to deal with, as I've said, the specific thing that you can link it to a traditional healer, where Yanani says, or Gogos Tembiso said, for me, I made it clear that this is what this is about. Yeah. Then you will start moving in that direction. I hope that somehow answers your question.
It does answer. I do have a follow-up question. And anyone else who's got a question for our labor attorney, please just jot it down in the chat section. So my follow-up question is then, what do we do with managers who don't believe in this type of, in this belief or any other belief that comes across, in their office, and they're like, I mean, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, and I'm just going to say it because you mentioned it, it doesn't have to be a white manager talking to a Black employee who needs to go. It can even be a Black manager talking to a Black employee and they don't believe in that. Is there a way legally that the employee can deal with it in order for them to be given the time off?
Yeah. So as I said, yeah, it depends what you're dealing with. So if obviously a manager is dealing with someone who's not performing, they need to go through and then I guess the employee. Am I still here? Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah, now I can hear you.
Okay, sorry. I told you I'm operating from the Eastern Cape, and yeah, so it's just cut off the network.
Yeah.
Sorry. So let's start from the beginning. I think, firstly, I applaud you for raising awareness about these things, because then I think, the more people are aware of what the dynamics that they're dealing with, the better equipped they are to deal with issues. Because some people respond from the fact that they don't understand what is going on. But certainly, once there's at least an understanding of what the issues are, so the employee says, I want to take time off. So they're applying for leave, right? And then the question is, well, what kind of leave can you apply for? I guess is your next question. Now the question is, what are our leave policies? Isn't it that we need to start off? Obviously, if the person is saying, I've got ill health issues, now coming to that is leave is regulated in the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. Firstly. And then when we look at the different leave, we've got annual leave, we've got sick leave, we've got family responsibility leave, and so forth. So there's no specific leave that's designated to going on some, traditional or sabbatical for spiritual reasons, certainly from the BCA perspective. Then what the BCA does now provide for, it says traditional healers who obviously have been accredited through their Traditional Healers Council, those who are having a license to be able to produce sick leave notes. Then a person who is sick that brings their sick leave note from their traditional healer then is obviously entitled to sick leave, right? So provided you meet the requirement, which is there in the BCA. Then if there's other types of leave, as I said, nothing stops an employer and an employee contractually agreeing, to certain, extended leaves beyond what is provided for in the BCA. So that can happen.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Gagamba.
With me? Sorry. When my phone rings, it just interrupts the network because I'm porting from my phone. So it's these people that are calling that keep disrupting my network.
Okay, no problem.
Sorry.
Okay, I think we've got an answer with that. I think everybody's cool, yeah? Gogo Jebu. Yesterday, so we were preparing yesterday, obviously, for this conversation, and we had really robust conversation. And I would like Gogo Jebu to take the panel, or to take everybody on the call through who else could benefit from this. So I know we've only got traditional healers on the call on the panel. However, they've thought about this even like further than what I have. And I'd like her to just take you through it, because it was really a humbling experience for me to actually hear her say what she was saying. I think you remember, ne? The other people.
Yes, I remember.
Yeah, benefit. Thanks.
So what I raise is that we think of spiritual wellness in only the extremes where a person needs to go for initiation. And this is in the context of African spirituality. So there are many other things that people need to do. Go for a cleansing, go for a ritual, and sometimes go for rituals and ceremonies So your coming of age ceremonies, where you find that you have to sit at home for 7 days or 14 days, depending on what is done in that clan. So what are the rules, specific rules for that clan? And that does contribute to spiritual wellness. And sometimes you find that there's, in fact, all the time for spiritual ailments, there are physical manifestations because the spirit doesn't really have anywhere else to express itself except in our bodies. Like Ukoko Sembiso was saying earlier, that she was having an inner body experience because spirit can only come into the body to express that this is where I'm ailing. So you find people who haven't gone for coming of age ceremonies having issues with their uteri, maybe fibroids, maybe other issues, you know, and this is how the spirit is saying, okay, there's an imbalance here, you know. And we find that there are prophets as well, people who have to go to the ocean to have a cleansing. They get a message at 2 a.m, drive now, go to the ocean, drive now, go to the mountain, you know. Those are just extreme examples. It doesn't really mean that someone who's going to become a healer is the only person who's spiritually afflicted. So spiritual affliction happens along a spectrum. And what we're talking about here seems to only be focusing on the extreme end of the spectrum. So some people just need to go and, like they call it, so going to the main homestead, so your elders, your grandfather's home, just going there and then you come back feeling better. Just going there for speaking with your ancestors or getting an elder to speak on your behalf at the family's or the clan's altar is is a ritual that's needed for your spiritual awareness. So we don't recognize it along a spectrum, but you find that in our everyday life, so if you want to create awareness or to accommodate spiritual wellness and African spirituality, you have to think of it as not just when a person needs to be away from work for an extended period for 4 to 5 months, and that's the only way they'll be well. I see people in my practice who have all sorts of ailments, and only maybe 5% need to be initiated. And sometimes you find that only 3% need to be initiated by me, you know, but I treat African spirituality along a very broad and wide spectrum. So if we only think of it as people needing initiation and limiting this conversation to that, then we're failing employees who just need to have a coming of age ceremony and they need to go for 14 days. And you know what, Lebu? It's not always the traditional healer who says this needs to happen. Spirituality is often driven by elders in our families. So you find that your mother says, look, I had a dream. You know how African mothers dream. You want to go out with your friends and you've planned for 2 weeks, and then the day before you go or just an hour ago, she says, I had a dream that this would happen, so you're not going. And that becomes, that's spiritual awareness of dreams and how our elders interact and treat and engage with their dreams. Then says, okay, no, then we're not going out. I'm sorry, my mother had a dream. It's among Black people, this is a valid reason not to go and not for the permission that you had granted to be revoked, But if your mother dreams and says, hey, it's time that you go for a coming of age ceremony, how do you get 14 days off? And I mean, if sick leave, as Kakamba says, is 30 days of a 3-year cycle, how quickly can you use it up? I'm pretty sure if Ugogo Tembiso opted for sick leave, she would have used it up in the first month. And it would mean that going back to work and going back now, even if she has ailments or she's tired, because there's a type of burnout that you feel after the process. It's not that you go for Trasa and then you immediately go to work and you're in a jet take. And yes, you are well in a lot of ways, but you are tired on a blood level. So everyone in your blood, because your ancestors are not external to you, like they're not these ideas that come or these people who are foreign to you and then they come, they're in your blood, it's encoded in your DNA. So that tiredness is a tiredness that everyone feels in your bloodline. It's blood deep and you need time to work it off. And sometimes you need clinical interventions to help with that. This is now a holistic approach to the health. So what I'm trying to say, the point of this is to say African spirituality doesn't only occur in the extremes. Sometimes it's along the spectrum, in the intermediate, in the immediate. This is where people also need awareness and accommodation.
Thank you very much. Before you get comfortable again, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, and it's on the chat, but for the purposes of a voice recording, how long does it take for a person to go through the initiation process?
It's unique to everyone, and I think the case that Kagamba was talking about, the person did get initiated, they did have some interventions, they did get some time off, but then you find that the ancestors then come and say, look, you need 6 more months. So I don't want to say it's 6 months and say on average, and then find that I'm putting other people at a disadvantage, because each person's journey is unique, and what the ancestors need is very unique. And let me say that I'm Gogo Chepu, right? And that means that that's the ancestor who's leading and is the main one who works through me, right? But I've had a lot more ancestors who come through in trances and introduce themselves, and they have needed other things. So I didn't just get initiated twice, but lucky for me, I left corporate in 2013, so I don't really have to follow processes and procedures to live and learn some things again. Sometimes that initiation is not as long as the first one, because the first one teaches you to connect with your ancestors. And then when you connect to them, they say, okay, for bloodline specific things, this is where we need you to go for a month. And I've done that. This is where you need to go for a week. There's an old man who stays in this village. This is what he'll teach you. And you know, the journey is also lifelong.
So,
before we move on, we've got a hand up. To me.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
My intention was to listen in on the conversation quietly and just learn. But I really have to applaud everyone on the panel. That's number one. Because for me, there's an incredible amount of perspective that is being shared here that many of us don't entirely understand. So even the narration and the storytelling of like the individual experiences and its impact on each of the individuals here that make up the panel has been mind-blowing, actually. And I wish this platform and this conversation could actually grow wider. I literally just reached out, and this is why I'm reaching out here. I literally just reached out to a colleague on one of the projects I'm working with, because I realized that while we are discussing it in the context of the industry from an ACA point of view, in our client universe as well, there's so much more of this. When I talk about our client universe, I consult to a travel business, and one of the things that we are constantly talking about is how to create a more inclusive environment in our ecosystem. And I really want to point out, I suppose, that this conversation is a critical building block to that hanging conversation around inclusivity, where our diversity and our full selves are invited to the table. That's number one, and they are accepted. The irony is we seem to have normalized and been able to mainstream many other perspectives of spirituality. I'm thinking about, we've spoken about Western, or rather Christian spirituality and that point of view. But I think about how we have been able to literally structure around Islamic practices, around Jewish practices, around Hindu practices, and here we are having this debate around African spirituality. and how we can enable it and welcome it a lot more. So for me, this is such an important conversation around inclusivity, creating a more inclusive industry and how it shows up. After this, I'm keeping quiet, but I'm completely moved by this exercise.
I'm going to take that comment of after this, I'm keeping quiet with a pinch of salt. I don't want you to keep quiet. Okay, and I'm really glad that Dumi, you mentioned all the other beliefs that people have that we have actually accepted as part of life, and it happens, and people move on. It's understood in our employee space, in employer spaces, that these things need to happen. Dr. Amba, I'm going to ask you again. Yesterday, while we were preparing, you spoke about a case about a person who was in the correctional services. Am I correct? Can you tell us briefly about that? I think it's important.
Okay. So in that case, which people may recall, the correctional service officers had dreadlocks, and they said the reason why they had these dreadlocks is because of their Rastafarian belief, and it's linked to that belief. And the court said in that case, so I'm trying to summarize and jump quickly, the fact that correctional service has a dress code that says our correctional officers must look in a certain way, they must have short hair, isn't enough to demand that these people have their dreadlocks cut because they are not dressing and not looking the way the correctional services department wants them to look. The court said, starting from that section 15 that I mentioned, which was about the right to religious belief, that these people have a right to this religious belief. And if someone wants to limit that right, so someone is saying, well, yes, you have this right, but it's conflicting with our requirements, with our environment, we have to look at the extent to which that is required. So the extent to which you want to limit this person's rights, right? And the court said the dress code didn't affect, had nothing to do necessarily with how these people did their job. And the dress code now being reference, to the hair, the dreadlocks. So that they had these dreadlocks didn't affect how they performed their job. It didn't have anything to do with that. So, it seems quite extreme to limit someone's religious beliefs, which is that they need to have these long dreadlocks as part of their spiritual belief, purely because they need to meet this requirement from a dress code perspective that they may have to maintain hair in a certain way. So the court said that would be a lot to ask for. And in that case, obviously the correctional services lost. The key thing that I wanted to talk about, in your previous question, when these calls disturbed me, was in that Kivitz-Kroon case that I mentioned, the issue wasn't around sick leave. The issue was around the person had said that the leave that they were taking is unpaid leave. So they had submitted those notes merely to provide an explanation about their absence, right? And so what the employer was denying in the Kivitz-Kroon was this unpaid leave to attend to these religious practices. And there again, it was this issue that the employer wasn't providing, any reasonable accommodation. They felt that they were just not being reasonable to try and accommodate these traditional beliefs. So that's what you find in one is, if you're going to try and limit someone's religious right and so forth, the measure is this proportional to what you are trying to achieve? And that's I think the part of the measure that one would have to look at. So the manager would have to look at to what extent this is affecting the workplace, and to what extent can I accommodate this? And if I can't accommodate it, there are processes, right? One of the processes is if you've got an ill health employee, you need to do an assessment. So you would still do the assessment to say, how do I accommodate this person? Do I need a new workstation? Can this person work from home so that they can not disrupt my work environment if they just have to leave randomly? Perhaps to maintain my culture and try and accommodate, they'll work from home so that if they need to go do certain things, but I want the deliverables. If that is too much and it's difficult to manage, then you then have this process to say, well, I've looked at the alternatives. I've looked at, granting you 6 months leave. I looked at having these things, but unfortunately, these measures are not, for me, they're quite cumbersome as an employer, and therefore dismissal is the only way for incapacity because, you're unable to perform the job that's at hand. But the primary starting point before you get to dismissal is obviously trying to find less burdensome means to try and accommodate somebody.
Thank you, that makes sense. And I wanted to actually ask that, especially the Rastafarian case, because as we came onto the call, and I'm very happy that she did, Gogo's Tembis was wearing her beads. Please tell us about your beads, and then also how embraced you are in the work environment when you come wearing your regalia. You told us a story yesterday that I'd love for you to share.
Cool. So I'm going to speak about a few things, right? Fortunately, for the most part, my beads are somewhat of an aesthetic choice. I'll have mornings where I feel as though maybe I need extra grounding, or I just want to feel closer to the people that I walk with. That is when I would wear my beads and my things. In what we spoke about yesterday, we were just talking about how, for instance, there was a person who went and had the Ndwaso process, and then when they came back, they had essentially had a bit of a situation where, wherever she went or he went to get initiated, certain things are unearthed. There's certain requests from your ancestors, and this person had said that they would need to be barefoot at the office. I've got my very strong opinions regarding that, which I will share in this group. It's a safe space, just between us girls. I do feel as though, in as much as we are asking for the places and spaces in which we work to be accommodated in terms of time off, and like kind of like our religious beliefs, our spiritual beliefs being observed. I think there needs to be a coming to the party on our end too, right? And I'll tell you what I mean by this. I know that human beings are inherently curious people, right? We want to ask about things that we don't understand. We want to know, for instance, like why do you wear those beads? What do the beads mean? Or why are you wearing like a head wrap? What does that mean? We want to ask those things. The reason why I sometimes choose not to wear my beads is, for instance, if we were to go to a pitch situation where I've never interacted with this client, I don't have that rapport, and quite frankly, I want the pitch room to be about the work. I want to keep the main thing, knowing how we as human beings are. We're curious, we want to ask questions. I don't want to step out of that pitch room and my client is thinking about my beads and my head wrap instead of the work that I brought to the table, right? So that is the aesthetic choice on days where, for instance, I am speaking to or communicating with people that I just don't have any rapport with, right? I want to keep the main thing the main thing. When I do decide that, you know, maybe I want extra grounding or I feel closer to my ancestors and I wear my beads to work, that will be on days when I know that, you know, these are my colleagues who have been extremely, you know, respectful, extremely like, you know, kind and accepting, even though most of them have, you know, different beliefs. For instance, I have a Jewish colleague who obviously, you know, in Judaism, there's certain laws and rules about, you know, what you do, what you don't do, what you believe in, what you don't believe in. But there's like a complete and utter respect, right? In situations where, you know, as I said, I'm going out, and I'm gonna interact with a person that I have no rapport with, I wouldn't wear my beads. I did do this a few times, and one of the days my boss just said, dude, like, why do you like not wear your beads when we're off to like meet certain clients? Like, just come as you are, man. Like, what's wrong? And that is when I explained to him, you know, this is why I do this. I want to keep the main thing the main thing. But what was really, you know, beautiful and profound for me was that he had a full appreciation and a full respect of, if we love working with Yanani because she's creative or because she's, you know, good at presenting slides or whatever the case is, if we love these things, right, about the human being and the professional that she is, and we claim to be inclusive and we claim to be a space that says, you know, bring your whole self to work, there shouldn't be a reason why this one thing that is obviously so fundamental to who she is and so like a part of the very fabric of who she is should be kind of like put in a box and put away sometimes, right? You love the ideas, which, you know, my brain, I do believe, is something that I genetically inherited from my parents and their parents and their parents' parents. And this gift is something that I have literally genetically inherited from my parents and their parents and their parents' parents. So that was really, you know, nice to know and nice to hear. And unfortunately, it's not a common thing. You know, people still covertly and sometimes even overtly, you know, stigmatize against people that are traditional healers, people that have different belief system and so on and so forth. I meandered there. Like, I feel like I answered 10 things. Sorry.
No, it's not a problem at all. I actually wanted you to tell us the story about when you actually had, when you were on a call and you were, you know, dressed in full attire. I love that story. I want you to share it, please.
Which story? Oh my gosh, I've got so many stories.
When you were presenting to a client just before you had to leave to go and do something, a ritual.
Oh, yes. So it was actually not on camera. It was more like of a face-to-face thing. I essentially had to go and perform a healing ritual right after that presentation. And this healing ritual is something called ukufemba. It's essentially like an exorcism. So there's a particular, you know, like dress code that you have to, you know, present yourself in, you know, in order to, you know, perform this ritual in the way that it is supposed to be performed, right? So there was literally just like not going to be enough time between me presenting the thing that I presented and me actually driving to Soweto to perform this ritual. So then I just decided to go to, you know, kind of like the get together in my full regalia. And you know, it was when actually, you know, my boss at the time was like, we're actually so glad to see you, you know, come out as who you are, even though, you know, we've got clients here, and even though we've got, you know, very senior people in the company here, we're so glad to actually see you as, you know, in the fullness of who you are. And the clients were just as amazing, which is nice. But then again, this is not common, you know, and that's kind of like part of why I suppose we are having discussions such as these.
Thank you for sharing that. There is a question on the chat section. Robin, thank you very much for the question. It's very multi-layered, so I'm going to take chunks at a time. Robin asked specifically around how we manage the time away. So how do we balance it? Robin, and I'm assuming, do you want to ask the question verbally? Maybe we can give you an opportunity, because I'm going to make a lot of assumptions here. Are you on?
I'm happy to.
Thank you.
Hold on a sec. Oh, I think some of it was answered. So please forgive me if it was. So I was just thinking about the longer periods of time. What's the best way we can manage the time away to balance between supporting the person as well as planning ahead in the business? So I know we threw things around like, you know, it's contractual, and, you know, you contract with the person one-on-one, and the sabbatical, and great insights around how to assess the situation. But I think, you know, just going ahead, I think it would be just, I think it's easier to at least have some kind of like a principle or policy around how we at least approach this. And I go into semantics to ask about, you know, how do we add that into our leave policies? What's fair for that? Does it mean that, you know, they're still employed during that time, where we accrue leave if we agree a sabbatical? So those are the more semantics and technical things. But my main question is really around then, what's the best way to go about doing that? So that we have some kind of stance, so people that are going through it can reach out and are aware, and that it's not that we're catching it at the end, having to make all these quick decisions. And I think just everyone knowing what that means and what it is and who you can approach and how is just so much better for everyone up front.
Thank you very much, Robin. Utkakamba's only got about 3 minutes with us. Briefly, before I call on Utkakamba, my view to answer that question was to look at sabbatical in its perfect sense, or in its pure sense. So open it up to the business to let them know that we've got a spiritual sabbatical. And Kakamba, this is my view, and I'm wanting you to contribute on my answer and Robin's. So, and then when the person does go on the sabbatical, it can be an unpaid sabbatical. The thing that I would want to give to a person going through this process is one less thing to worry about. Outside of inclusivity, outside of support, outside of non-discrimination within the workplace. What I want to do is to be able to give the people who need it, and like Gogo Jebu said earlier on, it's not just about the elongated times. I know we're talking about that now. Give the person the time that they need to go off. We know that in our industry, we've got like enough freelancers to plug in and get work going out or get work out. And that's just part of the planning. The part of the planning that happens for me, that how I see it happening, is the same planning that happens for a person who's going on maternity leave. We know when they're leaving. In this instance, the person may know also when they're leaving. So we plan together on how we bridge that gap. And then it happens. The costs that you may have to incur, and it's something that I'm looking towards, should this be implemented, is around medical aid, because I definitely think an employee would need that. And then post the sabbatical, then you can put, even on a contract that the person signs when they're going on sabbatical, you could put a clause in there to say they need to work back the time. So they're committing to staying with the agency for a certain amount of time. Kakamba, is that possible? Would that work?
We always say everything is possible to clients. It's all about their pockets and their appetite to risks. So basically, your appetite to risk and all of those factors will guide. But yeah, sabbaticals are things that exist. We talk about burnout. People have referred to burnout and all sorts of things. And so they've been introduced to allow people to go in some companies to go complete their PhDs, those who, you know, but not lose the candidate while they're completing their PhD. So And really what we talk about now is outside the traditional framework. So what the statute, what the basic conditions of employment is talking about. And when we start having these conversations, we're really talking about creating certain benefits, if I can call it that, because, you know, and the question then is, when we're creating this, what is it that from a business perspective, we're hoping to achieve? I think we had the conversation yesterday to say that we recognize that this is something that's happening within our sector, or, you know, respective businesses. And then the question is, what is it that we're trying to address? Are we addressing people just going off because they're afraid of disclosing where they're going? Are we trying to address an issue of retention? So what is it that we want to try and address as a business? And then obviously we develop policies as guidelines so that people act consistently, you know, in terms of how decisions are taken. Because obviously if you're treating people inconsistently, then you open up yourself to even claims of discrimination and the fact that, you know, the process is unfair because you're treating this person this way, that way, and that way. So yes, you must have a policy so that everybody is singing from the same hymn, if you can, and put it that way. That policy must tick all the box in terms of legal compliance around, for example, the issues of unfair labor practices. You know, you want to be careful how you make these decisions, and also the issue of discrimination. Now, I think that's the main thing around, yes, definitely have a policy. And then from a business perspective, what we've seen when we have these sabbaticals is our work back agreement. So if I'm going to allow you to go, then, you know, you sign an agreement saying, well, we'll pay my salary. Let's say you do go away for 6 months. And for paying my salary in that 6 months, I agreed to work for you for 2 years. So because you're making this accommodation for me, you know, this is what I'll do. What then happens is that if someone has to leave for any reason, then the work back agreement will say, you'll pay me, you know, pro rata to the period that's remaining. So if you paid my salary for 6 months and my salary is X and I have to leave after year 1, then you owe me 50% of the salary that I paid for 6 months. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's another way that, you know, that is included, that we will pay you either full salary or we'll pay you half your salary, but then there's a work back agreement knowing that, you know, you will keep this person in your business. I mean, one of the things in the conversation Gogo's Tembiso was talking about is, you know, how loyalty is really bought from this. You know, people want to be the best employers, and employers that can accommodate you know, some of these things that people go through, as I said, even the PhD, is that, you know, someone feels like this is just more than just a place of work. This is a place that, you know, that's there for me through thick and thin. So certainly as a retention benefit, is allowing yourselves to have a policy and allowing yourselves to pay, if you can afford, for the employee to be able to go through that. I'm not sure if, Robin, I'm answering all the questions.
You did, thank you, and thanks for the extra time. I'm also very mindful that you put in extra time for this. I really appreciate that.
Cool. All right. Alep has my contacts. If you have any questions, this is really an exciting conversation. I do think it really does deserve to have a sequel of sorts, that we continue debating and finding the best solutions.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. Good luck.
Sure. Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Okay, awesome. And unfortunately, I didn't mention that number needs to leave us 15 minutes prior to the end of our call. I'm going to open up the conversation to the floor because obviously our labor specialist is not on the call anymore. If anybody has got specific questions to ask to Gogo Tembiso or to Gogo Jepu, you know, you're more than welcome. or if they would like to contribute anything to the conversation.
Hi, Libby. So I just wanted to say to everyone, thank you for making the time for this. This is a very important conversation, and I'm glad that everyone in this Zoom call and your colleagues and in the industry is making time for this. It's very important, and it makes my job easier. My job as a healthcare worker, as a spiritual healthcare worker, it makes it that much easier. And it's nice for me to have an opportunity to know what kind of questions the employers would have, because most of them don't really get back to me. It's like, okay, we have your email, you've explained what needs to happen, let it happen. But I never really know from their perspective what they're concerned about and what they'd like to be more informed about. So
Yeah.
I agree with you, Kagamba. These conversations need to be continuous. It can't be once off. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to try and unpack some things from my perspective.
Yeah, awesome.
I think for me, the only thing that I'd add is just something that Tukoko Jebu had spoken about, which is how unique to each person, these journeys are. She mentioned a thing where, maybe the first time around where she got initiated, it was for an extended period of time. But then when she had to go through a similar experience again for a different Lozi, it was way shorter. It was about a month. So another thing that I just want to put out there for people to maybe think about a bit is these experiences are extremely unique to different individuals. So even though there might be like a 6-month kind of average time, for instance, there'd be a person that would come to you and say, I only need 2 weeks. Profits usually it's just a 2-week thing.
Yeah.
Or there'd be a person that says, I need a month. Some people, I have my views on that too, but some people usually say, I can just do this over the weekends. And in that case, like, how do you accommodate for that? The person's not necessarily asking for 6 months off. They may be asking for Mondays off, so that after, the hectic process that is ukutwasa over the weekend, on Monday, they have like a day off to maybe like recalibrate, recoup, so that they are fresh for you from Tuesday to Friday. So how does that look in an advertising agency structure where you're exploring things like 4-day work weeks? What does that mean for salaries? And what does that mean for like the team? Is this like, are we saying it's a 4-day work week, but instead of you working a 9 to 5, you're maybe working a 7 to 6, for instance? Like, are those things that you could potentially even have up in your policies where, certain people just don't need, a consecutive 6 months? So yeah, much to think about and I suppose figure out.
Yeah. Something else that I think is extremely crucial, which is I think another reason why I'm driving this, because in the journey of a person going through ukutwasa, the costs are very high. And I think that, in the same way that, a person going for surgery, they have to pay for the surgery, or a person going through medical school, they have to pay for the medical school for 6-7 years. And this is similar. So a person going through ukutwasa needs to pay for whatever, for the process that they're going to go through. I don't know if you want to, Gogos Tembi, so just take us through that, and also, having gone through it, would you, I know you would, obviously, because you're a healer, but would you strongly encourage employers to put a sabbatical like this in place, specifically, not specifically for to alleviate a person of the heavy burden of costs or the budget that they need to have, but obviously other things, but I'm talking specifically about the money side of things.
Yeah, so I would highly recommend, for employees to work out like some kind of system where your employer is still kind of making a salary. That work back system, I think, is fantastic. I think we see it work perfectly, in terms of maternity benefits. I worked at a fantastic agency for close to 4 years, and they paid my maternity leave the entire 4 months. But obviously, I owed them 4 months of working there. But like any new thing in your life, or like anything that needs preparation in your life, there are cost implications. Some of the cost implications that face an initiate are, for instance, Mautwasa, there needs to be goats. Sometimes, it's multiple goats. So, for instance, like Mnandatwasa Sunguni is Sutu Nomdao. Umdao does not require goats, but it requires chickens. So there's livestock there. There's chickens, there's goats forms, there's a goat for Msutu, there's a goat for Umgoni. So that's about like 2 goats and several chickens, right? Then there's what you are wearing, these beads, these amahiya, you have to be wearing like a particular uniform throughout kind of like your initiation process, because it's like a school, right? And schools have uniforms, beads, and even just like contributing to the everyday upkeep of the place that you're living at, because now you're living in someone else's home. Your Gobela has opened up their home to you. So there'd be things to consider, like what is your grocery contribution per month in that home? What are you contributing in that home, for instance, in terms of electricity and water, right? They are also, after you've kind of like done the initiation process, then it's the Ndwaso. Ndwaso is a full celebration with the livestock that I mentioned, the goats, the chickens. There's alcohol that you might have to buy, umqomboti, things like that. Thereafter, there is actually a third stage, which is called Ingoduso, or your homecoming, your homecoming. So some ancestors ask that, as part of the procession to your home, there should be a cow. A cow is like, 15,000 rands, or a goat or a sheep, or whatever that particular bande school, initiation school, or whatever that particular family or clan demands, is part of that. And then obviously with the cow, there'll be guests. You have to feed your guests. There's gifts that you have to buy for your Gobela, obviously, for, having taken you through this journey. It's nothing major. It will be like a blanket, maybe like a bottle of like really nice liquor. There's certain tokens that you would, also have to give to maybe other people that played a part in you becoming a healer. So part of why I think it would be really cool to have some kind of policy that ensures that you are not losing out, kind of like your salary, are those costs. But also life doesn't stop just because I still had to pay my car insurance. I still had to kind of make sure that the rates and taxes back home were paid for. I had to make sure that my daughter's nanny, because I'm responsible for paying for her salary, she still has a salary. So all those things to consider from a financial standpoint.
Yeah, thank you very much for articulating that. Robin had a question. Oh, okay.
I'm still here.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
Yeah, I'm buying some
Sharon,
time.
we'll get to you afterwards.
Okay, brilliant. Hi, I just wanted to ask a little bit more about if an employee comes to us to tell us, they're going through this process, but they don't really know who to reach out to. Because we had that about 2 years ago, because she had a terrible experience initially and she was pregnant at the time, and then she had to kind of start it all again. So luckily we had a client that that had gone through it and had shared that experience, so we could connect. But is there someone that we can maybe connect someone to, or is there, you know, just some kind of support that if the person genuinely comes to us or says, look, I don't know what to do, because whether it's they have a broken family or whatever the case is, that they can't really access that information, well, what can we do to help?
I think Gogo Jepu would be the best person to
Thanks, Gogo
answer this.
Jepu.
She's the elder.
Hi, I'm still here. You know, Robin, I appreciate that you would be concerned about the employee, but they need to check in their network of healers. So even with the bad experiences, there might have been some people there who they connected with, and it's easier now to find healers. Really, most are online. I know Gogo Tembiso is still on Twitter. You know, some on Facebook, some on Instagram, and unfortunately, this process demands that you listen to your intuition. You know, it demands that you find out which healer feels like they resonate with you. And if it's now it feels like you're talking about trauma, and still as a Sangoma, I'd say see a therapist. I've even paid for some of my initiates to go for therapy, because this now sounds like a clinical issue where they feel like, okay, I can't even trust my intuition, but I need help. I think the first place to start there is therapy. See a clinician, and clinicians will give them the tools on how to deal with the trauma and how to overcome the trauma. And then they would be in a better position to find for themselves the person who can help them, because this process demands that you listen to your ancestors, and your ancestors help you find the person. Unfortunately, there's no one size fits all. So people who come through and have resonated with me deeply, like Hugo Tembi, so you know, and the thing about this is that it's a life-changing experience. So even when you come for just for a reading with me, it can be a life-changing experience, or you can feel like, no, I don't resonate with it, and I don't need to take it personally. I never take it personally, but I take it that I was part of your journey, but I wasn't the end goal, you know, or I wasn't the person that your own ancestors resonated with. So I'd say that sounds like trauma, and it needs for the person to go for therapy. And that's an easier place to refer and find people. So you have your ICARES, your employee wellness programs. Maybe they can start there. And if they need a psychiatrist, I've been on psychiatry meds as well. As much as I'm a healer and I initiate people, I also have to recognize when it's a clinical issue, and clinical professionals are quite advanced, and they have network systems. They have very advanced and robust referral systems. I'd say get them into that system, and then they'll be better equipped to find their own person.
Thank you for that. I wouldn't have thought on those lines. I really appreciate that insight, Gogo Jepu.
It's a pleasure, Robin. It really sounds like trauma, and you need to address the trauma. And who better to address that trauma than a psychiatrist, because they'll see another healer. And I mean, this if they need to go for initiation, it's quite rough. If you ask Gogo Temi, so she shared in our brainstorming session yesterday that it's quite rough. It's quite traumatic. You know, your ego is dying. Everything that you've held on to is in the process of dying, and that's very traumatic. So the process in itself is traumatic. So if they had a bad experience, then they come to a Gogo Jepu who still needs to follow the rules, who still needs to be strict. There still needs to be hierarchy. There can be very many triggers. That's the potential for triggers. And we know what triggers do. Triggers make you feel like you're in danger even when you're not. And now you need a clinician to explain to you, this is your trick, to help you name your pain and help you deal with it, and sometimes not necessarily heal the pain, but to help you deal with it, so that by the time you're moving on to another Gogo, who's the person who's supposed to initiate you, then you're better able to handle it.
Thank you for that. That makes sense. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. Sharon, I think you've got a last question. Is Sharon on?
Yes, I am. So I was just wondering whether there are, in other industries, how they actually deal with this, and if there's anything that we could model leave for this on. It's just a question, Lebo. Have you looked into it at all?
To be quite honest, I haven't, Sharon. And like I said to you, when I actually started this conversation and I wanted to have this information session, having worked in quite a number of industries, I mean, to name a few: banking, engineering, construction, FMCG, a lot of FMCG. And then I came into the advertising space. I must be honest with you, I have never come across an industry that has got so many healers in it. And I think, you know, it's not that it's not happening in other industries, and maybe those people are keeping it quiet, or, you know, they're keeping it confidential or whatever, for whatever reason. I think as creatives, we are very expressive and we're out there. And generally, I would say, you know, the environments that the creative spaces are very inclusive, as compared to a corporate. So that's the reason I decided to have this conversation. I've never come across the number of healers that I've come across in other industries that I've come across in this industry. I mean, to give you, I was telling my panel yesterday that, you know, including Gogo's Tembi. So there's about 4 healers in our building on a head count on a head count of less than 100.
Wow, that is.
And in my previous agency as well, I knew of people who actually made the decision to resign because they needed to go and fulfill this. And it wasn't just one person. And in other industries where I'd worked, I've never come across that.
Okay, I understand. Lebo, maybe we should do a thought leadership piece on this in terms, and actually have it published in Biz Community and Mark Lives. If you're willing to write a thought leadership piece on it, because it is something that we need to put out there to get people thinking in order to find a solution or a way forward that healers or people who know that they need to be healers have something to. It's really just to start creating awareness, because I mean, I know someone who got very, very sick and was getting sick continuously, and then she went and she did her journey and she stopped being sick, and she was told she could never have children before. Guess what? She's got 2 children now. So yes, this has been very informative. I really, really want to thank everyone who participated. I mean, yes, been very informative. Thank you, Lebo.
It's a pleasure. I'd like to thank also Gogo's Tembiso and Gogo Jepu. I think your willingness to participate in this discussion is really, I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Lebo. Thank you for the initiative.
No problem.
Thank you, Lebo, and thank you for hosting us.
It's a pleasure. We'll chat about the thought leadership piece, Sharon, and then people are asking for a follow-up. So maybe we do need a follow-up with different types of other people who could benefit from something like a spiritual sabbatical. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Lebo. It's been amazing.
It has.
Thank you, Lebo.
Thank you very much.
Get in touch regarding the thought leadership piece. I'd love to get my hands on it.
Of course, you knew I was going to contact you. I mean, yeah.
All right. If you do one, please send it to me, and I will send it to Franco. And I really do believe that this is, I think we stand at a point where we could be forefront leaders in something that is actually a very important topic in our country. Very,
Absolutely,
very important.
Sharon, and that's the reason why I'm driving it in our industry. I think we definitely need to. I don't think we realize how influential our industry is. But also, just going back to what you said earlier, and without sounding arrogant, please don't think it is arrogance. I actually think we've got the solution. It's just fear of implementing the solution, fear of being the different one. Oh my gosh, because they, you know, in as much as we'd like to embrace and be inclusive, there is a bit of stigma still around specifically traditional healing. And it's time to remove that stigma. So I absolutely agree with you. It's not an if the thought leadership piece happens, it's when the thought leadership piece happens, because I'm definitely going to push it. And then I'm definitely going to push that we have another webinar, Sharon, because we need to start talking so that we can start dismantling the myths and the stigmas and all of that stuff that really doesn't exist in this world, and embracing it completely. So we've got a solution, and I think we just need a few people who are willing to take a stand and implement.
Yeah, Lebo, another idea. So for a company to pay someone their full salary for 6 months to do this, even if I mean, there's maternity benefits that employees are entitled to, but I'm thinking perhaps, and I really don't want to make extra work for myself, but perhaps we should start thinking about trying to get a fund together that could support, that people could apply to, that through this fund, whether it sits inside the ACA or outside the ACA, as a passion project for Sangomas who want to see this, who want to support other Sangomas. Maybe there's something we can actually do in our industry to raise funds that we can support this. I don't know how yet, but I think what will stop a lot of people from actually doing the journey is the financial impact they've got to live. So
Correct.
It's just a thought, is maybe we can just all keep in the back of our minds.
Cool. Thank you so much for hosting this, Sharon, and the ACA. I think our time is done 12 minutes ago.
It doesn't matter. This is such an important topic. And thank you, Lebo. Thank you for your passion of being a trailblazer.
No worries.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Okay. Bye.